The wind and the snow horns will tell a man what he's made of. January had gnawed the ridge to bone fences drowned in drifts, the creek sealed in glass. I rode with a scarf stiff with frost across my mouth, the cold working through my coat. Between gusts I heard a sound the storm had no right to carry, a thin, high cry. Then another. Not coyote, not calf. Infants more than one. I swung down and led my horse into the timber seam the wind had half erased, boots punching to the ankle at every step until a leaning fence post rose out of the clearing like a bad memory. A woman was wired to it. Her head hung, barbed wire, stitched her sleeves and ribs. At her feet lay 3 small bundles wrapped in torn cloth, dark and wet. The crying came from those bundles. God, I said. Sometimes that's the whole prayer. Up close I saw the work of a careful cruelty, one eye swollen shut, lips split, dress crusted into ice where water had been thrown. The wire had chewed purple furrows into her arms. Whoever did this meant the night to finish her. I'm cutting you down, I told her, steady as I could. My knife found the twist. The last strand sang and snapped. She fell into me light as straw, smelling of iron and the long, thin breath of someone out of tears. The babies. 2 rasped themselves hoarse. The third only shivered. They weren't. Swaddled proper just petticoat and a torn coat tail. I jammed my gloves into the woman's hands and pressed a bundle to her chest. Hold. I split my saddle blanket and wrapped the other 2, talking into their faces. I didn't ask her. Name. There would be time for names if we made it home. I tucked the smallest inside my coat, skin to skin like I'd done with late calves. The tiny body shocked my ribs with cold. You're coming with me. Getting her onto the horse took strength. I didn't own, so I borrowed it from wanting. I set her sideways in the saddle with the baby pinned to her heart, slung the other across my chest, and led us into the white roar dot. It tried to turn us around. I watched my boots and the horse's ears, counted steps when the next tree disappeared. My cabin sits a mile off the ridge in a notch of spruce. Tonight I blessed that and cursed the distance. Twice she slid against the horn. I stopped, set. Her straight told her stay. The door took my shoulder and let us in. Wind dropped to a moan in the chinks. I swept the table clear, laid the babies on wool, and fed kindling to the iron stove until an orange mouth began to eat the cold. The woman shook in my chair while I held a cup to her lips. I didn't ask who had tied her or why there were 3. Talk could wait for breathing. They were the smallest people I'd ever seen. I rubbed their hands and feet and kept talking while the room warmed. One protested. The quiet one clamped my finger with a grip that felt like a decision. Outside, the storm paced the roof. Inside, 4 hearts beat. I looked at the woman and the 3 faces and felt something old in me stand up. You're safe, I told them. Simple words and a vow. By the time the drifts sagged and the creek began to speak under its skin of ice, the cabin smelled less like fear and more like soap, wood smoke, and milk. We learned the girls by their small signatures. Ruth with the sledgehammer cry, Mercy, with the soft bleat, and June, the quiet one, who studied you like she'd write it down later. Marabel mended slow. The wire grooves flattened to pink ropes. I nailed the cradle from scrap pine and cut their names into the rail. You never had children? She asked. No, I said. I had fences. Hattie Webb came riding hard hat, tied down, cheeks raw. She slid off her sorrel before it stopped and stomped mud from her boots, with news in her eyes. You didn't hear it from me, she said. Joseph Quinn's at the Lowlands saloon, telling any ear that'll hold whiskey. He's got a wife stolen by a mountain rat and 3 illegitimate girls he aims to correct. Says he'll come with papers, men, and God. Marabel's hands gathered her shawl until her knuckles went white. He'll bring the Deacons, she whispered. Men who like to be told they're righteous. He's passing a hat, Hattie. Sighed. Coin buys horses. Coin buys guns. Enough nods to make trouble. Law walks slow. The room changed shape. How many? I asked. 6 sure. 8 likely. More if he talks long enough. I set coffee in her hand. Marabel sat like the floor had tilted. He'll take them, she said. He'll dunk them in the trough and call it clean. Then he'll feed them lard and scripture and wait for a boy. No, I said. Hattie studied me. Are you set to make that stick? I can. After she left, I took stock. Stacked cordwood where it could be a wall. Drove nails through a plank to make a mat a horse won't step on. Cut firing. Slits into the north shutter and wedged the window so it'd hold. Moved flour sacks to the stairhead. Filled 2 buckets and left them by the stove. Strung a bell line across the path. Marabel stood with Ruth on her shoulder. I don't want you hurt because of me, she said. I'm not doing this because of you, I told her. I'm doing it because I live here. Then softer, and because of you. We talked roots. If riders came by the draw, they'd think the gulch a shortcut. It eats hooves. If they took the timber spur, we'd hear them early. She learned where to stand if glass broke, how to lift the trap in the kitchen floor to the crawl. I showed her the rifle's action and hated that I was making a teacher out of fear. That night, with the girls linked like beans in the cradle, I sat on the step and oiled the Winchester. The mountain breathed. I pictured Joseph with his papers, and his men and his God, and felt what I'd felt in the storm. Quiet the weight of a decision that fits Dot in the dim, Marabel came to the threshold. If they come, she said, we'll answer. I said. Spring was close enough to smell. Trouble was closer. I checked the bell line again, then the latch, then the sleeping girls. On this ridge, the good we'd found would have to grow teeth. The stove chewed through kindling until the iron glowed. I hooked the kettle, set water to hum, and stripped my coat. The smallest girl still nested inside my shirt. Like a coal, I was afraid to set down. I wrapped hot bricks in rags, built a blanket. Nest on the table, and kept my voice going the way you keep a lantern lit in wind. Stay with me, I told the babies. One squalled, one blinked. The quiet one watched like a hawk. Their mother tried to stand and couldn't. I knelt. The cold had left her the color of old paper. Drink? She did, then coughed until it hurt to hear. Name? Marabel, she whispered. Marabel Quinn. All right, Marabel, I'm Silas Granger. You're safe. How old are they? Hours. Her eyes slid to the bundles. He said I'd ruined the line. She swallowed. First cried, and he called me a curse. Second, came and he hit me. Third, he fetched wire. I kept my hands moving. Sometimes the only prayer is work. I cleaned the cuts with warm water and whiskey, bound the worst of the wire furrows, tucked a brick against her feet. When the sting found her, I said easy and meant it like a promise. She told the rest in pieces. Forced marriage to Joseph Quinn. Land as religion. Sons as proof. He said a girl is a mouth that doesn't bring a harvest. Her fingers grazed the bruises at her throat, reading them like raised letters. He said if I birthed a boy, he'd buy me shoes with buttons, black ones. You birthed 3 miracles, I said. That's the only arithmetic that counts in this house. She stared like I'd spoken a language she'd never heard from a man. The kettle hissed. I mashed oats and a pinch of sugar in a tin cup, thinned it, then set about coaxing the babies, a dab on my fingertip, their mouths learning the notion of want. The quiet one opened like a pocket knife and latched to the rag. Life is stubborn if you hand it even a small job. Marabel's hands shook. I put the spoon in them anyway. Feed them, I said. They're the only thing worth feeding. Her mouth worked, no sound, then a breath that changed the shape of her face. She fed them careful as prayer, the little breaths puffing against. Her wrists, not beauty like a painting, beauty like something that survives winter. I didn't think anyone would do this, she said. I didn't either, I told her. Then I heard them. She slept in the chair. Lying down made her breath go shallow. I took the floor by the stove with my rifle across my knees and watched the door swell and shrink with the wind. When a girl fussed, I rubbed her back and told a plain story about a stubborn cow and a fence that wouldn't mend. Maybe babies can't listen. Men can, and I needed a tale to come right. Toward dawn the storm stepped down from rage to muttering. I banked the fire, checked the latch twice. "If he comes," Marabel said without opening her eyes, "he won't take you." "Why?" "Because I'm standing in the way." She let out a small sound, like a coin finally paid. The girls slept, bellies round. Gray light found the cracks in the window, and I knew the line I'd crossed wouldn't let me back. Yesterday I was one man. Today I was the kind that says no and means it. Morning came hard and blue. I'd slept in my boots and woke to the bell line tick once against the nail by the door. Not wind. Horseflesh. I slid to the shutter slit with the Winchester-shouldered .4 riders. Coats open to show iron. The lead man's mouth was split by an old scar that made every smile a threat. They rained by my woodpile, eyes measuring windows and chimney. I stepped onto the stoop. Behind me the girls breathed their small choir. "Morning," I said. "You Silas Granger?" The scar asked. "I am." He thumbed a paper like it gave. "Himhite, we're here for Joseph Quinn's property. A wife ran off plus 3 bastards. Property stays in a barn," I said. "You're talking about a woman and babies. Joseph says she's his by God and county. He aims to fetch her home and set her right. You can stand aside and keep your hide, or you can make us earn it." The ridge was so quiet I heard the creek mutter under ice. I let that comb sit in my chest. "She was never his," I said, "and she sure as hell ain't yours." Leather creaked. A man coughed the way boys do when they want to be thunder. The scar's smile snagged. "You got papers?" "I got a fence and a will," I said, rifle low but steady. "Oath hold." He unrolled the paper church letterhead and pretty ink and read the usual about covenant and obedience. When he finished, I said, "Reading it out loud don't make it true. Truth rides with the one carrying it," he said. "We'll be back with more saddles and a lawman who likes sermons. Put stew on. Stew's for friends." He turned his horse. The others followed slow. Men leaving a threat behind never hurry. I waited till they were ants on the far ridge, then went inside. Marabel stood by the cradle with Ruth's heel in her palm, pinning the world to one place. "They'll come back," she said. "They will," I said, with talk and tin. June blinked up like she planned to remember every word. Mercy snored soft. I fed the fire, though the room was warm. The cold lived in what they'd left. "He'll say I ran," Marabel said. "He'll give folks the right words so they can nod while they watch." "Let him talk," I said. "We'll answer." After bread and coffee, I walked the yard. I dragged the woodpile into a waist-high wall and packed snow into the gaps, then poured water to set it like stone. I staked the draw where a gallop turns to a fall. In the timber I strung 2 pans with a line. Any horse that broke it would sing our warning. Toward evening Hattie came back slower. "He's stirring bigger," she said. "The Deacons like the smell of a crusade. Sheriff, 2 days if he rides now, 3 if he waits. Then it's us and the mountain." She looked past me to the cradle and the rifle laid by the plates. "He's counting on you quitting," Hattie said. "I already did." I told her, "Quit being the kind of man who lets wolves call themselves shepherd." Dark came early. I checked the latch and the bell line again. Marabel sat with June asleep against her shirt, a woman who'd chosen not to die. Weaned pawed. Eaves. Down in the timber, a branch cracked like a shot. "They'll be back," she said, softer. "Good," I said. "We'll be ready." Weeks wore a path through the drifts until brown earth showed in seams, and the creek spoke plain. The cabin learned our names. Ruth announced sunrise before any rooster. Mercy hummed when she found her fingers. June watched like she was taking notes. Marabel's color came back slow. The wire grooves flattened to pale ropes. Sometimes her hand went there and stopped halfway. Because one of the girls needed her more, I set posts where wind had laid the fence flat, patched the roof with scrap tin and pitch, and turned the south wall into a garden bed where snow quit first. On warm noon hours I carried the cradle outside so the girls could hear the thaw and woodpeckers. Hattie came with flour, thread, and a pot with one dent, and left the kind of gossip that keeps a man honest. Lowlands talk, she said, had gone from certain to impatient. I nodded and went back to work. Nights, when the girls granted us an hour, I whittled. Pine smells clean under the knife. I cut 3 small plaques and pressed each to the warm belly it belonged to. Ruth, Mercy, June. The letters weren't pretty, but they were correct, and I trust correct more than handsome. I sharpened Marabel's kitchen blade, because a dull one punishes the tired. I planed a shelf so she didn't have to bend so far. I oiled her boots until the leather stopped looking like it wanted to crack. None of it counted as talk, but it said what needed saying that one evening, after the girls surrendered to sleep like 3 drunks in a rowboat. Marabel stood in the doorway with lamplight on her hands and said, "I see you." "I ain't hiding," I said. "You are," she said, not unkind. "Men hide and work, but you keep choosing us over and over. It isn't just the night you cut wire. It's the shelf and the oil and how you test the stove lid before I do. I see you." I kept breathing. "Praise delivered plain can throw a man. You saved them too," I said. "You stayed." "I didn't stay," she said. "I came back." "That's different." She took my hand. Not soft, not romantic, just human, steady as the ridge under us. We held that line without ceremony until the lamp guttered. No vows, just a door left open. Spring made fools of us a week, then threw sleet, to remind us who held the cards. In the bad days we made an inventory of courage. I taught Marabel the grammar of the Winchester until she could load and work the lever without looking. She taught me the songs mothers used to make night listen. When the sky cleared, I set 3 saplings along the path where travelers would see them first, staked and tied so wind couldn't lie to them. Apple if they took. If they didn't, we'd try again. That's the trade. Before sleep, I hung the plaques over the cradle and stood there till my back told me to be sensible. The girls breathed in small, syncopated proofs. Marabel set a hand on my arm. "Thank you," she said. "The kind you say when any more words would cheapen it. You're welcome." I said, meaning to stay. We didn't speak it, but both of us chose the same quiet thing. If trouble climbed this ridge, it would find a home, not a hiding place. Trouble can do much to a home. A home can do more back. By noon the ridge was a chalk mark, the world scraped to white. The bell line sang once horses in the timber spur. Through the slit I counted shapes, 6, then 8. In the middle rode a tidy man in a clean coat, too fine for work. Joseph Quinn had come. Marabel was already standing with June asleep on her shoulder, and the other 2 trying out storm sounds. "Now?" she asked. "Now," I said. "Down the ravine to the spruce, cut east to the old blaze. Dry fold under the fallen pine vault ladder. Crawl in, keep them quiet. If I don't come, take the creek to Hattie's at dark." "I won't leave you. I'm not asking." I set my knife in her palm, tinder, watered milk, a heel of bread. I tied the shawl to cross her chest and set a baby in each sling so they could hear the bird of her heart. "When I open the door, you move. Don't look back. If you hear shots, keep counting steps." Her eyes asked the last question. I touched my forehead to hers. "I'll find you," I said. While she readied the bundles, I set decoys, a dragged bough to lay a false trail toward the gulch, a straw-stuffed shirt in the back window with a hat, a lantern hung to throw a man's shadow, nail mat under the porch, snow, top step greased, stove banked hard. Winchester to the jam. Voices came, with the windmen trying to overhear their own bravery. "Marabel," one bawled. Another read covenant like God took dictation from cowards. Then the smooth voice I knew without meeting. "Joseph." "Mrs. Quinn, Tantrums over. Bring me what's mine. I opened the door so the blizzard stole his. Drama. They aren't yours, I said. 8 dark shapes at pistol distance. Joseph tipped his hat. Sir, I'll have my wife and girls now. Mountain air corrects men, I said. 2 riders slid for the woodpile wall I'd iced to stone. The bell line trembled. Marabel brushed my back lightning under cotton, then slipped past. Small and fast, the girls tied to her like truth. The snow folded her up. I held the doorway until the spruce swallowed her. Joseph lifted his hand as, if weather obeyed, enough. You rode a long way to be told no, I said, and put 1 round into the snow, a foot off his bay's nose. The horse reared. A man lunged for the porch, hit the greased step, and stamped both heels onto the nails. His howl cut the wind. Careful, I called. Floor's tricky. They scattered, half firing at the window, where the lantern threw my straw man's shadow. Glass jumped. I counted their oaths, tapped the 10 on my woodpile with a round that found the man crouched there. He learned to lie still. Another shot low into the draw reminded the rest that snow hides holes big enough to swallow pride. Sheriff's on the way. Someone lied? Good, I said. Tell him to bring coffee. Between gusts I listened for Marabel, and heard only wind and my own blood good news. She'd made the spruce and the wolf ladder, and was already turning our lie into a truth. I set my feet on the stoop, ridge at my back and 8 men in front, and felt a clean peace. Love had walked into my house and changed the math. I wasn't guarding a cabin. I was buying time. Snow slashed sideways and bit the eyes, cutting men down to outlines and guesses. I kept the stoop, counting their shapes and breaths, buying minutes the way a man buys nails 1 at a time. Joseph tried a preacher's tone. Sin resists, then submits. Step aside. Step closer, I said. A shot cracked from the flank, wild, scared, and flame, stitched my shoulder open like a bad seam. It spun me into the jam. Heat went to iron cold, then back to heat. I stayed upright because falling would teach them something I didn't want them to learn. Granger's hit. One of the deacons yelled. The courage in them flickered. Sometimes a wound in the wrong man reminds the rest they aren't immortal. I worked the lever, put a round into a log by Joseph's boot that kicked chips into his nice coat. Your aim's still poor, I told the man who'd winged me. They tried to swarm 2 left, 2 right, but the nail mat and greased step argued loud. Another went down, swearing he owned the porch, and the porch disagreed. Joseph's jaw tightened. Enough foolishness, he said, lifting his pistol. That's when the bell line sang again. Not from the spur, but from the road hard and clear, different rhythm. More riders. Men peeled to face the new threat, hands uncertain on cold iron. Voice I hadn't heard on this ridge yet cut the wind clean. Holster it. Sheriff's office. A star walked out of the white with 3 deputies at his shoulders and Hattie behind them, cheeks raw, eyes lit. Behind her, hooded in frost, came Marabel on her own feet. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't cringing. She had mercy under her shawl, Ruth tight to her ribs, and June nested against Hattie's chest, blinking sternly at the world. The sight put my bones back under me. Joseph tried to paste a smile over his teeth. Sheriff Mather, you're just in time. My wife's been abducted by this mountain derelict. I have papers. Mather said, taking the pistol from Joseph's hand like a man removing a toy from a child too near the stove. Mrs. Quinn, that true? Marabel stepped forward until the steam of her breath ghosted his badge. She pulled her sleeve up to the elbow and laid the pale rope of a wire groove in his lamp-black palm. He tied me to a post and left my daughters. In the snow, she said, steady, loud enough for every man to hear his own shame, if he had any. He promised me shoes for a son. He brought wire for 3 girls. Silence bit. Men who'd come for a crusade found themselves at a crime scene. 2 looked at their saddles the way cowards do when they want to be far away fast. Joseph snatched at his script. Hysterics, she ran. She's unwell. I ran after you wired me to die, Marabel answered. And I came back to say this in front of law. You don't own me or these girls. You don't own breath. You don't own God. Hattie lifted. June a little. I found her at the creek, Sheriff. Blood on the snow all the way from the low fence. She nodded at my shoulder. And he's been shooting at the man who cut her down. Mather looked from my blood to Joseph's neat coat, to the deacons' uneasy mouths. He folded Joseph's paper and handed it back without reading. Assault with intent to kill. Attempted infanticide. Conspiracy. He flicked his eyes at the deputies, disarmed them. Half of Joseph's men understood the weather and let iron go. The other half reached habit before sense, and 3 seconds of ugly followed shouts, a snap of leather, one fool trying to be famous. I put a round into a drift near his boot, and the deputies finished the argument without making widows. Joseph lunged toward Marabel, last bad idea, in a long string, but I stepped off the stoop and met him halfway, my bad shoulder shrieking. We went down hard. He found my wound and drove his knuckles into it with a miser's joy. I rolled, got a hand on his wrist, and held on until his strength went brittle. When he spat in my face, I laughed, small, surprising, like a man who's just learned he can still laugh. Mather's hand clamped Joseph's collar. Iron kissed his wrists. You can practice your sermons in jail, the sheriff said. Maybe preach to the rats about covenant. Marabel was there before I could stand, palms on my face, heat and wind and the metal smell of blood. You found me, she said, and I realized she meant now, not the night at the fence. Kept the door open. I managed that. She tore a strip from her skirt with her teeth and bound my shoulder like she'd been doing it all her life. Hold still, she said. I did, because I decided months ago to obey smart orders. Mather tipped his hat to her. You want formal papers, ma'am. I can file them. Or you can stay where you've clearly already chosen to be. I'll file something, she said. My name, the girls' names, and a place that isn't his. Hattie grinned at me over June's head. Told you law walks slow, she said. Didn't say it never arrives. Snow eased into sift. The ridge breathed again. Joseph, small now in irons, wouldn't be big again for a long time. I felt the cabin behind me, the girls, against Marabel and the mountain under all of it, and knew the storm had shifted its work from breaking to mending. Summer stepped down the ridge in green. Snow pulled back to the bowls. The creek learned to laugh again. Hammers spoke from our eaves. I traded fence posts and a winter of wood to 2 valley hands, and we shouldered the wall out and built it. Back wider beds not pressed to a stove, a table a traveler could sit without bumping a cradle. I planed barn wood and littered it slow, the hearth at Granger Ridge. Marabel chose it while kneading dough. A hearth is where heat decides to stay, she said. I'm staying. One Sunday at red sundown, with the girls quiet, we stood under the saplings and spoke vows without paper. Hers, I choose this man, these girls, this place. Mine, I keep the door open and say no to what harms. Hattie said amen like she'd won. Travelers found us because the ridge sits on the way to everywhere, if you'll climb. Drifters for coffee, freighters with sore backs. I fed them stew. Marabel counted coin and wood. The girls practiced opinions on every stranger. Ruth tried to ride a mule by its ear. Mercy adopted a lizard and named it Pastor. June folded linen so tight the weak-behaved Sheriff Mather brought a packet. Joseph Quinn pled to what he couldn't dodge, he said. There's law when a court remembers it's for people. He tapped the papers. You want different names written? We wrote them. Ruth Granger, Mercy Granger, June Granger. Marabel set her hand over the last and looked at me the way she had when I gave her a knife and said, run. A man counts riches by how warm they keep him at night. I was a wealthy man. Work filled the days. I split wood till ash raised blisters. Marabel taught Lowland children their letters off flour sacks. Saturdays she opened the kitchen and made a parliament. How to stitch. Price eggs fair, Tell a man no and leave the no standing. I fixed what broke and learned to listen from the doorway. People left us strays. We kept them till owners came or didn't. At night, after trade and chores, I banked the fire and held my palm to its heat. The room kept the day the scrape of chairs, spoon music, laughter, and under it the quiet fact that once there had been wire and a post and endings in the snow. And now there was bread rising and a sign with our name on it, and a woman who had unlearned flinching. Sometimes I walked to the ridge and looked down to where the bell line had sung. The wolf ladder had fallen with rot. I left it. What I know is plain. A man can live alone a long time and not be lonely until someone knocks and changes the measure. After that, even the wind sounds different. I keep the door open. When strangers come up the path, I set out bowls and wood and let the fire decide to stay.